What's up, friends? My name is Jess. Welcome back to my channel. I'll be honest with you, I did not take notes for this video like I usually do for my videos, and I also don't really know what the structure of this is gonna be, so we're just gonna see how this goes. I just really love aesthetics, and I love sharing my opinions, so I wanted to talk about some book covers today. And if you clicked on this video, then I guess a part of you wants to hear my opinions, so thank you for feeding into my ego. I'll be comparing different cover editions for a few books, just giving my opinion on things like the composition, the design elements, the font, etc., and then ultimately deciding which of the covers I like the most. I have read all of the books that I'm going to be talking about today. I don't want to speak on the covers for books that I've never read because if I don't know the story, there's probably a lot of symbolism that would go flying over my head. That's not doing justice to the design. So first we're going to talk about The Diviners by Malibu. We have the original cover and then the new reprint edition. Take your guess which one I like more. I don't think a lot of people disagree about this one, to be honest. The original cover was so good and it makes me so sad that I will never know what the rest of the series would look like in this style of cover. I just feel like the original cover captures the vibe of the time period so much more. To me, it screams 1920s Art Deco with all of the geometric elements, especially that little bit of a arc underneath Libra's name that I see on all kinds of 1920s designs. The typeface that was used for the Diviner's title also very much 20s. The eye at the top of the cover feels like it comes from a vintage illustration. Literally everything about this cover is made to feel vintage. And I love the view of the city in the back too. The new cover, on the other hand, I get that it does a better job of indicating a mystery/thriller-ish vibe. And it's maybe a better cover for marketing purposes because it very clearly puts the Diviners into a genre, which makes it easier for people who already like mysteries and thrillers to look at the Diviners, be like, that's a mystery/thriller, I'm gonna pick that one up. But because it's putting it into a very clear genre, the design itself feels very basic. It doesn't scream the Diviners specifically, it just screams mystery thriller. I'll be honest, I can't remember if beads are relevant to the story, so I'm not gonna say anything about the image itself. And I'm not really mad about the typeface that was used for the Diviner's title. It's a pretty cool one, but it just doesn't have the same vibe as the story to me, especially because the title is neon. The new cover just made very little effort to evoke the 1920s. The most that I can see is just the little corner elements have that geometric Art Deco design, and that was it. In my opinion, the original cover wins hands down. Before I move on to the next book though, I do want to show you some other cover editions because while I was doing some research into putting this video together, I realized that the Diviners has a lot of different covers, like more so than I think the usual book would have, and some of them are pretty cool, and I'm intrigued by these. However, what is this? The title reminds me of like old school cartoons with like, what is it, a 50s/60s vibe? It has a cheesy cop book kind of aesthetic to it. I don't understand where this one came from. If you see me looking down a lot, by the way, I have the cover images on my iPad. That's what I'm looking at. The next book is The Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. And again, this is the original cover versus a reprint edition. Now, let me tell you a story. I started reading the Vampire Academy series before it was finished. You know, not all of the books had been published as I was reading them. It was by far my favorite vampire series as a kid. And eventually I caught up with the series. I had read all the books that were out and I had to wait for the next book to come out. But by the time I remembered that I hadn't finished the series yet and then the next book should have come out by that point, the covers had changed. I couldn't find the old covers in bookstores. And I hated it. I hated the new covers. And sometimes I'm petty, which in this situation meant that I refused to continue reading the series until I got the final two books, which were the ones that I was missing, in the old covers. I literally waited 10 years before I found the last two books in the old covers in a thrift store. I wasn't looking very hard, I will admit, but I waited 10 years because I did not want to read Vampire Academy in the new covers. I honestly don't have a lot to say about these covers because my feelings about it can be summed up very succinctly. Vampire Academy is a trashy YA vampire series, and I love it for that. I love that it is a trashy YA vampire series, but still a good one, you know? The new covers try to hide this fact, and they try to make the series appear more mature and cool for like a more modern audience, I guess. No, I reject that completely. I think you should let trashy look trashy, which is what the old old covers do. Old covers win. Next is All's Well by Mona Awad, which I think is the book on this list that I have most recently read. And I'm going to be comparing 3 different covers for this one. We've got the US edition, the UK edition, and then the Canadian edition. This is the first, and I think the only case in this video at least, where the one that I visually like the most is not the one that wins in my opinion. To me, the UK edition is beautiful. I love that cover so much. I love how bright it looks with like the really stark whites and the light blues. I love all of the texture that you can see. Like the woman is very clearly a drawing. And I will admit that this woman kind of reminds me of Princess Leia, but if you don't look at it too hard, she really looks like a Shakespearean actress. So I will take it and I will ignore the Princess Leia comparison. But I love the aesthetic. That's the point I'm trying to make. The thing is though, that while I love the aesthetic, in the context of the book All's Well, I don't get it. It does have kind of a vintagey vibe to it, and therefore you could argue that it has a Shakespearean vibe, especially with the woman on the cover, but it doesn't feel like the book to me. It doesn't really tell me anything about the book. Of the 3 covers, I like the Canadian edition the least, but even this one represents the story more than the UK edition does. The woman on the cover looks like an actress, maybe Shakespearean. I will admit I don't actually know what Shakespearean looks like, but she looks like an actress. And I feel like more care was taken to have the woman on the cover represent our main character a little bit more. I like the fact that she's lying on her back, the way that the main character is often lying on the floor in pain. I appreciate that the arrows are sticking into her body, which I do think is a representation of chronic pain. I am going to dock some points for that though, because I appreciate accuracy over a lot of things. And the main character says that her chronic pain comes from a hip and back injury. So I would have appreciated if the arrows were like actually in her hip and her back. I also don't know why the clothes on this woman are so transparent. Enough so that you can see some nudity. I'm on the fence about what this means, or even if it means anything at all, because is it sexualizing women unnecessarily? Or is it a commentary on the fact that women with chronic pain often feel like they have to perform their pain in order to be believed? Or maybe that people will have sympathy for you if you're conventionally attractive, but don't you dare be in pain and ugly on top of that. I feel like maybe I'm giving them too much credit. I would love to hear the designer of this cover explain what they were thinking. But based on the knowledge that I have, I think the US edition represents the story most. It's obviously a theater mask, and I think that's a symbol that a lot of people would instantly recognize and associate with theater. Maybe the other 2 covers have more discreet nods to the All's Well That Ends Well play that just went over my head and I didn't realize. But if it went over my head, I think it's very likely that it's going to go over the head of a lot of people. The other 2 covers just don't scream theater as much as the US edition does. I also think the fact that the theater mask is made out of pills adds a little bit of interest to the design and tells you something about the story in a very quick, simple way. I look at this cover, I read the synopsis, and I'm like, okay, obviously the main character takes a lot of medication for her chronic pain and has probably developed an unhealthy dependency/addiction. The pills scream illness to me. I just feel like the US edition tells you way more about the story that you're about to read than the other 2 do. So US edition wins for me. Although when I physically get a copy of All's Well, I don't know if I'll go with the US edition or if I'll just go totally aesthetics and I'll get the UK edition. I don't know. Next we've got the original cover versus the new cover of The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This is another one where I feel like the winner should be very obvious. Does anyone like the new covers? I have never seen anyone say that they prefer the new covers of this series. Before I ever read this book, my friend Rachel told me how much she hated these new covers and how hard it was to find the 3rd book specifically in the original cover. I didn't like the cover change then, and now that I have read the first 2 books, I like the cover change even less. I think it's atrocious. Again, I've only read the first 2 books, so I don't know, maybe the vibe changes in the later books, but based on those first 2, this series has a dark, gritty, underground London vibe. And maybe the old covers aren't the best representation of that, I will admit. I think they're very aesthetically pleasing, but maybe they could have suited the story even more than they did. But the old covers at the very least don't look like weird marketing materials for a cult disguised as like a yoga and hardcore wellness/health retreat or some shit. I don't even know if that all made sense, but I'm just saying that I could see the designs for these new covers being used for like a spa or an MLM. They're entirely too bright. And I don't like the little bit of gradient that's happening. It's it just feels weird. The old cover has more elements from the story, it has richer colors, and personally I always love seeing design elements interact with the text on the cover, which you can see on the old covers with the way that the lines are intersecting with the letters. I'm a sucker for that. Just in every way, the original cover wins. And the final book I'm going to be talking about is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know these two editions as the US hardcover versus the US paperback, but I don't actually know if those are what the editions are. That's just what I'm going to call them for this video. I love the colors of the paperback edition, but I feel like the hardcover edition captures the vibe of the book better. The paperback edition is busier, there's more action, there's more chaos to it, because you can see the waves crashing, there's movement there. But Malibu Rising itself isn't a very chaotic story, only like a little bit towards the end. What I remember of the story most is moments of slowness, of stillness. I remember it more as telling the life story of the four Riva siblings than as a truly action-packed story. So right away, I feel like the hardcover edition matches the story better. It's more still, there's more dead space in the design. This edition also has more details and more accurate details at that. The most obvious being the fact that there are four surfers in the water, and surfing is how the four Riva siblings connected the most. While I was saving the pictures for this video, I did notice that the paperback edition has four birds, which is maybe not a coincidence. Maybe it's intentionally representing each of the four siblings, but that one feels like kind of a stretch. I don't feel like it's as obvious as having four surfers there, so I prefer the surfers. The seller for me though, the reason why the hardcover edition was brilliant to me is that if you actually look at the cover, you can see smoke on the right hand side. It's not super obvious at first glance, it's not in your face at all, but it's like a very subtle indication of the house fire that's coming. When I first looked at the cover, I didn't even notice that the smoke was there until I read the synopsis, and I literally read that there was a fire. I read the word smoke in the synopsis, and I was like, oh, wait a second. I think that's smoke coming in on the side instead of like sea mist, which is maybe what I originally thought it was. That is the kind of detail that I love. I will give credit to the paperback edition because I really love the colors and I really like the font too, but I'm fine with the colors on the hardcover edition. I think they're bright, I think they're colorful, I think they work well together. So hardcover wins. It's the one that I have personally, although I would have been happier with either one. Those are all of the covers I'm going to be talking about today. Let me know what you think, if you think one of the other covers should have won for a specific book, or if there's some detail that I didn't notice that went flying over my head, especially for All's Well, because I feel like I'm missing some with the UK and Canadian editions that I just don't notice. Also comment and let me know if there are any covers that you want me to talk about, whether or not that's comparing different editions of the same book, or talking about cover changes mid-series, or just standalone cover reviews, I guess. I worked as a graphic designer for a little bit, and it's been a hobby of mine for several years at this point, so I'm always happy to talk about design. Just give me the excuse to do so. I hope y'all have fun with this video, and I will see you in the next one.